The word kamikaze conjures up images of suicide planes smashing to their deaths, but the first time this word was used was 700 years earlier. On that occasion, the mighty Mongol Empire, led by the grandson of Genghis Khan, was preparing to invade Japan. To do so, they needed to get their fleet across the sea. In the Shinto shrine of Ise, the Japanese emperor bowed before the gods of the wind and begged for a miracle. Today we will learn how a typhoon wind saved Japan from the Mongols and paved the way for Japan to become a world power. This is Knowledge Voyage.
But before this video starts, don't forget to hit subscribe and hit the bell so that you can get all of our weekly videos about history. Thank you.
The Mongol Empire was the world's largest ever land empire. They swept all before them, crushing enemies as varied as Indian elephant archers, Persian warriors and European knights. But their greatest conquest was of China, and Genghis Khan's grandson Kublai Khan was now the emperor of China. Kublai may have been emperor, but he was haunted by insecurity. His brothers, ruling different parts of the Mongol Empire, refused to acknowledge his authority as the overall supreme Mongol Khan, and as a Mongol, his ethnic Chinese subjects and even courtiers always viewed him as an outsider. One way Kublai felt he could win respect across the board was to conquer Japan. Kublai had every reason to be confident. The Mongol army had swept all before it, and the capture of Korea had placed his forces just 120 miles from Japan. Korean ships were high quality, and the Koreans, plagued for years by coastal raids by Japanese pirates, were eager to eliminate Japan. Furthermore, the vast population of China provided limitless men to make up Kublai Khan's invasion army. The Mongols had also perfected siege weapons, such as the fearsome thunder crash fragmentation bombs fired from catapults. Finally, Mongol cavalry archers were the fear of the known world. Kublai believed that expert Korean ships, human wave infantry, siege weapons and expert cavalry archers could defeat anything Japan had in response. All that was needed was to get them across the sea and bring that superiority to bear, and for that he would need more ships. Chinese subjects were ordered to mass-produce ships in a hurry to back up the existing Korean ships. His first attempt to invade Japan was in 1274, and this saw the Mongols capture the small islands of Tsushima and Ike as stepping stones. On these islands, the Japanese samurai put up fanatical resistance. The Mongol fleet was eventually blown off course and forced to return to Korea. Kublai felt he had time to have a second go. This first and ultimately unsuccessful attempt had spooked samurai commanders. They were usually suspicious of each other, but the brush with the Mongols was a warning and spurred them to work together. The samurai ordered the construction of defensive walls near the beach and rallied troops. For the next few years, Japan waited, and in 1281, the invasion they were waiting for finally came. And this time, Emperor Kublai Khan was taking no chances. The Japanese executed his ambassadors, and this would have filled him with a rage to punish them. Despite their reputation, Mongols had a surprising respect for ambassadors and diplomats, and were outraged Japan did not show this respect. Kublai Khan assembled a massive invasion fleet to chastise and invade Japan. There were 4,400 ships and 100,000 men loaded up. The ships were bursting with infantry, horses, siege weapons, and food. They were even given gold Buddha statues that sailors and soldiers would bow to for good luck. The size of this fleet is difficult to understate, and it was the biggest invasion fleet assembled until D-Day nearly 700 years later. For the Japanese, it must have been a worrying sight to see such a massive fleet emerging from the mists off Japan. The Mongols were the fear of the known world, and now a small number of Japanese samurai was all that stood in the way of yet another conquest. The first waves of Mongol forces hit the beach, and they found the new defensive walls built by the samurai quite a challenge. Fanatical clashes ensued on the beach, and the samurai fought with the individual skill, flair and fearlessness they were famous for. After fighting on the beach, samurai loaded onto small ships, rowed out to the main Mongol fleet and boarded. The samurai then hacked and stabbed on deck in daring boarding actions against the Mongols, and fire ships were set amongst them. The Mongols were probably not expecting this, and doubted they could break through. After the battles on board, the samurai withdrew back to Japan, and the Mongol ships waited just offshore. The ships chained themselves together for added stability, and waited for the moment to strike. And it was at this point the crews noticed a sudden wind whipping up. Some would say a divine wind. This wind suddenly whipped up and reached speeds of 124 miles an hour. To give you an idea of how powerful this speed is considered catastrophic on the ranking scale of the Japanese Meteorological Association. The fleet was smashed with high waves, blizzards of rain, and wind that could rip off sails and masts. As masts twisted, the ships buckled and broke, and by the end of the typhoon, a breathtaking 100,000 men from the Mongol fleet had drowned, and hundreds of ships had been wrecked. To put that in context, the loss of life was equivalent to 66 Titanic sinkings. The biggest invasion fleet in history, assembled by the world's most powerful man, had been reduced to splinters of wood on the ocean in a matter of minutes. On shore, a large number of Mongol forces were now stranded, as the ships needed to take them home were destroyed. The Japanese samurai rounded at the Mongols on the beach and commenced mass beheadings. The invincible Mongols had been defeated by a combination of samurai bravery and typhoon divine winds. Across Japan there was great rejoicing, and it was clear to many that the Shinto gods had rallied the wind and waves to defend sacred Japan. In China, Kublai Khan was furious and began building up a third fleet, but this fleet would never sail. Instead, Kublai would send his fleet against targets as far away as Vietnam and Java to make up for his defeat in Japan. Both of these attempts to restore his esteem ended in further disaster and further undercut his reputation. Kublai would eventually succumb to a gluttonous and drunken lifestyle, dying a shadow of his former self. The most powerful man in the world had been beaten by the divine wind. China fell into a decline that would last centuries, but in Japan, things were changing. The seemingly miraculous intervention of the gods created a sense that Japan was sacred and was protected by the gods from any attacker. This fostered a sense that the Shinto gods who had sent the saving storm should be fervently obeyed, and this was a major plank of Japanese hyper-nationalism in later centuries. The cooperation of all the regional samurai in building the defensive wall that had caused the Mongols so many problems created a sense of national unity and purpose, which would lay the groundwork for the creation of a unified modern Japanese state. With their belief Japan was protected by invincible gods, Japan began to strike out at its neighbours. Japan would become increasingly ambitious and aggressive in the centuries to come, capturing lands from wars with China, Tsarist Russia, and finally World War II. And at first it looked like the gods were indeed on Japan's side, as they hacked out an empire from Alaska to India to New Guinea. But by 1944, it was clear Japan was on the ropes. As the US fleet steamed ever closer to Japan, the Japanese people prayed for intervention, but this time the gods were silent. As a result, the Japanese command decided that if the wind would not come, their young men would become that wind. Inspired by the Kamikaze, thousands of young Japanese men would give their lives in kamikaze attacks, their units named explicitly after the last saviour of Japan from invasion. Japan would eventually fall, its gods silenced, its winds still, and its young men unable to hold off the invaders. In the years since World War II, increasing interest has formed about Japanese history and the failed Mongol invasion, and it has attracted particular attention. Underwater archaeologists close to the site of the Mongol invasion have found fascinating things. Among them is the examination of timbers from Mongol ships on the seabed. The nails appear to have been shoddily put in. Furthermore, the masts had not been fixed securely, and the supply pottery on board appears to have been produced at haste and was of low quality. This all points to one thing, that Kublai Khan was so desperate to invade Japan, he rushed the preparations for the fleet. The workers in China would have been under immense pressure to hit production targets in a tight time window. This meant that substandard ships were sent out to sea in typhoon season. It's possible better quality ships may have survived. Marine archaeologists did not find any Korean-built ships on the seabed, only hastily produced Chinese boats. Had the rest of the Mongol fleet been built to the same quality as the Korean ships, maybe the invasion of Japan would have been a success, and history would have been very different.
Thanks for watching everyone. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Thank you.